Hello, this is Alex at the Stadium, and today is Tuesday, May 19th, 2020. Uh, on Tuesdays, we talk about role-playing games. So I have here D&D starter set, but it's more so what we're talking about today is expanding the world of D&D and playing with different themes. So starter set, pretty straightforward stuff. I mean, really typical high fantasy Dungeons and Dragons things. It leads into the Tyranny of Dragons storyline with the pre-written books. Again, pretty straightforward. What you would thematically what you would expect from Dungeons and Dragons, what they've been doing for decades, right? But then, in recent years, Wizards of the Coast has been expanding kind of what you work with in Dungeons and Dragons. So we've seen this Stranger Things starter set. Stranger Things, of course, the hit Netflix show where these kids are avid Dungeons and Dragons players in the 80s, but then these horrible monsters show up in real life, and all sorts of weird things start happening around them. It does include a couple of Demogorgon figures, which is a monster that they put into the show. And really, Stranger Things can be, I think, partially attributed for a recent surge in interest in Dungeons and Dragons across the general population. We've certainly been selling a lot more D&D since the show became popular. That's definitely a thing. But it's still Dungeons and Dragons in this starter set, just you're playing with the characters created by the kids in the show, and you're playing the campaign that those kids were playing. But it is still very much Dungeons and Dragons, just branded. And then what happens if we go a little further with that? Another thing very popular that has contributed to Dungeons and Dragons' increase in popularity in recent years is the podcast Critical Role with Matthew Mercer as the Dungeon Master. Critical Role being a video podcast of people playing through these campaigns created by Mr. Mercer. And what this new book, Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, is it takes the world created within that podcast, and they created this in association with the Critical Role people. There's even these cool maps on the back. But it's a world entirely that had existed outside of Dungeons and Dragons. It was completely homebrew as a world, but they were playing with Dungeons and Dragons rule set. And so this is a guide to world building in that world and creating your own campaign set within it, which is pretty sweet. But some people are, a bit of purists as far as content in Dungeons & Dragons. Obviously, a little bit of imagination critical to playing the game, but it can be, depending on how you're handling it, can be a little overwhelming for new players or surprising to people that already are familiar with the works already created for the game in an official capacity. So this is, in a way, a really large leap for Dungeons & Dragons to make in taking this entire world that didn't exist and then suddenly incorporating it into the game in an official capacity. And then sometimes you just got to go a little silly and maybe jump the shark a little, and that's how we get the Rick and Morty starter set. So it is still mechanically Dungeons & Dragons, and the idea thematically is it is still the world of Dungeons & Dragons, but being played by the characters of the show, Rick and Morty. And this comes with all sorts of things going on. Pre-made characters, of course, pre-written campaign. There's some special abilities that are kind of unique to this. There's a Dungeon Master screen that's unique to this. And the inside of the Dungeon Master screen is really wild, seeing as Rick is the Dungeon Master. But this is definitely, I think, the most out there product that Dungeons and Dragons has ever released. So, what do you think about them trying different things and about, anywhere from just working with a show that actually has Dungeons and Dragons to working with a show that is really all over the place in every episode? Personally, I think it's great that they're doing this. I think that every campaign should use at least some amount of homebrew. It keeps things fresh, keeps things different, keeps players a little on their toes. The extent of it will depend on the dungeon master, and as with anything in the game, if you are going to use homebrew, especially something more complicated or more divergent from the norm, communication with the players is really important to know, so that they are familiar with what's going to be different, what's going to be new, and how these things are going to incorporate into the rest of the world. But yeah, that is me for today. So do let me know what you think, whether it be in the comments on the YouTube, on Facebook, in Discord discussion. But yeah, you have a great day.